After reading The Glass Castle, and after reading Angela's Ashes, and after watching the memoir Running with Scissors, I began seeing some interesting relationships between them. What intrigued me the most was how each protagonist seemed to have boundless amounts of tolerance towards their states of stress and poverty. I couldn't believe that children living in such poverty could be so resilient to be able to mature to a level in which they could lift themselves out of the poverty their own parents imposed upon them, and emerge as successful citizens of New York. After pondering this, I began to form some general inquiry questions that I wanted to understand better. And these questions were this: is it possible to benefit from adversity? Or is it possible for stressful and traumatizing events to provoke psychological changes that could lead to positive changes or transformations in life? And furthermore, what are the side effects of the complete opposite lifestyle? What are the possible outcomes of overindulging children? And how do they compare to the effects of post-traumatic growth seen in children in poverty? First of all, there are some terms I'd like to define, the first one being resiliency. Fundamentally, resiliency is understood as referring to positive adaptation or the ability to maintain or regain mental health despite experiencing adversity. And now you may be wondering, what is adversity? Well, quite simply, adversity is misfortune or difficulties, something that opposes one's desire. In the three texts I read, adversity was very prevalent. For example, in The Glass Castle, at the young age of 3, Jeanette Walls was cooking hot dogs. Normally you wouldn't think of children cooking hot dogs at the age of 3. However, she ended up burning herself making these hot dogs, and now she has a scar for the rest of her life. Another example of adversity in this book was the fact that her father was an alcoholic, and he drank all the entire home's income, causing them to be forced into a deeper state of poverty. This leads me to relate this book to some similar adversaries seen in Angela's Ashes. So they're similar because of the fact that both of their fathers were drinking. However, Frank McCourt, the main character, also had to deal with the death of 3 of his siblings, one of which was his little sister, and the other 2 were his twin brothers, all under the age of 2, due to the fact that they were malnutritioned and not properly sheltered. And finally, this leads one to the memory of Running with Scissors, where the young child Augustine is forced to cope with the divorce of his parents, and shortly after being disowned. And then after being disowned, he was adopted by a psychiatrist into a very dysfunctional house, where at the age of 14, you were considered an adult, and you were allowed to basically do whatever you want. An example of this was at the young age of 14, this little boy, Augustine, was dating and having sexual relations with a 35-year-old man. However, with all these examples of adversity, one may think it would impact these children negatively, causing them to develop certain mental disorders such as post-traumatic stress. However, the post-traumatic stress or something like depression. However, the complete opposite is seen. A tremendous amount of tolerance is seen in these children, and a tremendous amount of resilience is also seen as well. And so these characteristics ultimately lead to the children's success in life. So some examples of resilience is how in Angela's Ashes, the father, who's an alcoholic, takes all of in the Glass Castle, takes all of Jeanette's money that she's been saving to actually get out of the poverty and move into New York. And instead of giving up on her dream, she actually strives harder to regain that money and ends up successfully in New York. Now I'd like to take a look at another real-life example of how poverty can lead to the success and growth of an individual through a longitudinal study that was done in Hawaii, on the island of Kauai, based on 698 children which were born in 1955. So these children were examined to see the long-term effects of growing up in a high-risk environment. So these studies were actually done for a really long time, over a long span of time, for nearly 40 years, and most of the children were born to unskilled sugar plantation workers of Japanese, Filipino, Hawaiian, Portuguese, Polynesian, and mixed descents. And 54% of these children were actually poor, and nearly one-third of them were actually considered to be at risk because of the exposure to a combination of at least uh, uh, four individual parental or household risk factors, such as health problems, familial alcoholism, or violence, divorce, or mental illness in the house. So these combinations of misfortunes are exactly the same as what is seen in the novels. So example is in violence in the Running with Scissors, the 35-year-old man who was dating the young child tried to actually kill the psychiatrist. Familial alcoholism I've already discussed. Health problems in the Angela's Ashes, it's very prevalent due to the fact that there's a lot of pneumonia and something called consumption in the town, which kills off many people. And so the children in the study were evaluated at ages 2, 10, 18, and 32 years of age. So finally, the research concluded that 2/3 of the high-risk 2-year-olds developed learning along with behavioral problems by the age of 18. However, 1/3 did not. So the children developed, this third of children developed into stable, competent, and productive adults. And when they were examined again at the age of 40, all but 2 of them remained successful. And the fact that these children, and there's also in fact, these children exceeded and outperformed children in low-risk families. Another interesting finding in the study was that that they found about the children with the behavioral problems that I discussed earlier was that at the age of 18, 50% of them did not show any signs of the problems at the age of 30. So instead, they had satisfying jobs and stable marriages. So basically, this means in the end, 2/3 of the 698 children emerged successfully out of the high-risk environments. Now you may be wondering, how is it possible to attain such amounts of resiliency and be so tolerant in such states of poverty and adversity? Well, I learned that there are 3 main ways to aid in improving the resiliency of impoverished families. The 3 factors to be considered for the improvement of resilience is individual personality traits, protection and support from family, and communal and national support. Regarding the individual personality traits, an important aspect of this includes a positive self-view, good communication and problem-solving skills, and good mental and physical health. These traits help one to believe that certain obstacles are not insurmountable, and that one has the ability to control one's fate. In terms of family protection and support, I have learned that it's very important to have some form of emotional support, be it from a parent or from siblings. This is mostly seen in the Glass Castle when the siblings aid each other to help each other get through emotional struggles together. And finally, there's also the factors in the community that aid in raising more resilient youth. A community which has access to school and a nation which has access to welfare has a huge positive impact on a youth's ability to develop resiliency. This is seen in Angela's Ashes because the family would not be able to survive without the charity from the community and the welfare from the nation. Now that we have the understanding on some ways to attain resiliency, we need to take a look at the question of what are the possible outcomes of overindulging children, and how do they compare to the effects of post-traumatic growth. First of all, what is post-traumatic growth? Post-traumatic growth, by definition, refers to the positive psychological change experienced as a result of the struggle with a highly challenging life. One example of this could be the resiliency I discussed earlier. However, there are also different forms of post-traumatic growth, and I'd like to show you a short clip that can explain this.
So imagine a big explosion as you climb through 3,000 feet. Imagine a plane full of smoke. Imagine an engine going clack, 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 clack. Sounds scary. Well, I had a unique seat that day. I was sitting in 1D. I was the only one who could talk to the flight attendants. So I looked at them right away, and they said, no problem. We probably hit some birds. The pilot had already turned the plane around, and we weren't that far. You could see Manhattan. 2 minutes later, 3 things happen at the same time. The pilot lines up the plane with the Hudson River. It's usually not the route. He turns off the engines. Now imagine being on a plane with no sound. And then he says 3 words, as unemotional 3 words as I've ever heard. He says, brace for impact. I didn't have to talk to the flight attendant anymore. I could see in her eyes, it was terror. Life was over. And I want to share with you 3 things I learned about myself that day. I learned that it all changes in an instant. We have this bucket list, we have these things we want to do in life, and I thought about all the people I wanted to reach out that I didn't, all the fences I wanted to mend, all the experiences I wanted to have and I never did. As I thought about that, later on I came up with a saying, which is, I collect bad wines. Because if the wine is ready and the person is there, I'm opening it. I no longer want to postpone anything in life. And that urgency, that purpose, has really changed my life. The second thing I learned that day, and this is as we clear the George Washington Bridge, which was by not a lot, I thought about, wow, I really feel one real regret. I've lived a good life. In my own humanity and mistakes, I've tried to get better at everything I've tried. But in my humanity, I also allow my ego to get in. And I regretted the time I wasted in things that did not matter with people that matter. And I thought about my relationship with my wife, with my friends, with people. And after, as I reflected on that, I decided to eliminate negative energy from my life. It's not perfect. It's a lot better. I've not had a fight with my wife in 2 years. It feels great. I'm no longer trying to be right. I choose to be happy.
Traumatic events can reveal the uselessness of attempting to create security because life can be taken away at any moment in time. This video is a great example of how a person is changed for the better when faced with a traumatic event. If this plane crash never happened, this man would not have the same outlook on life. He'd probably still be having fights with his wife today. I like to think of traumatizing events as an earthquake, and human beings as buildings. Now consider an earthquake takes down these buildings. The remaining rubble of the old buildings must be removed so that new, stronger buildings can be built in their place. Now consider that no earthquake ever occurred and the same old weak building remains in its place. That's how I believe spoiled children to be. Children who have been spoiled have not yet had the privilege to grow from and transform from varying degrees of hardships. These children become overly dependent on their parents and sadly have not learned to meet their own needs. This is because parents always are meeting their needs. Another problem with overindulging children is irresponsibility. Because these children are spoiled, they do not learn responsible behaviors and generally don't understand the concept of boundaries as they grow up to be adult. This could ultimately lead to negative outcomes such as spending, gambling, overeating, and drinking. Imagine you took the character traits of this spoiled child and you apply them to a child who lives in poverty. Suppose you put this child in the same situation as Frank McCourt from Angela's Ashes. I can confidently say that this child would not last long. This is because the only way to survive and rise out of the ashes is through resilience and adversarial growth.